Leadership Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Leadership Story Talks is produced by Narrative, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
And in the book, Stephen tells the story about being on the subway, and this gentleman comes on the train and he's got 3 kids, and the 3 kids are running wild, and Stephen is thinking, why doesn't he get a hold of the, he's like, why are you such a bad father? And he finally says to the gentleman, do you think you can get a hold of your kids? And the gentleman just looks at him sadly and said, I hear you, but we just came from the hospital where their mother just passed away. And you can see it just gets, storytelling moves people. And Stephen said, and it just his paradigm got changed in a second. Because he realized his assumption was wrong.
All right. Well, that was Kory Kogon from FranklinCovey, where we had a really interesting interview about the long-lasting impact of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and how it's reached more than 100 million people or 100 million copies at this point, created a course out of it that's been going on for a number of years. And this quote, that what she mentioned, that's kind of seminal story that's in the book and that informs some of those habits as well, is just the power of assumptions, and equally important, the power of storytelling to break down those assumptions. So you think someone is exactly the picture you had in your mind of them, and then something happens that shows you otherwise, and then that becomes a story to prove that assumptions can have a very negative impact on your behavior. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted for us to build on. But what are your reflections on that?
I agree. The assumptions, all of us, we can't help it. Sometimes we make snap assumptions about things. We create a character in our head. We create the dialogue, and the story does something important because it brings context. And I think that's why that example that Kory used was so important, because it was a simple scene. We've all been like, oh, person's so noisy. But when the gentleman shared the context about what was going on behind the scenes, we can have some empathy. We can, create a space for that, and then check our own assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we see this a lot in our work, that especially in teams, whenever I work with a team, I know that, everyone comes into a room or even online in a remote space. And usually I know a little bit about the person's background or each individual team member's background from a bio or something like that, something that's been posted. And I'll do that research. And so that'll create some kind of assumption in my mind. Even if I come in with a very positive intent, assumptions, are normal. That's what we all do as human beings. So I think one of the things that happens is that once you're in the group and people come in, these assumptions that you've formed in your mind, it's good to really be aware of what those assumptions are. What have you based them on? And then once you're with the person, to let that go and to sort of say, okay, now I've got an opportunity to learn about the person that's in front of me in the flesh, as opposed to what I learned from their bio or what somebody else told me about them. So I think, our intention is always to bring curiosity to the person and to try as much as possible to set aside all of our assumptions. And I see this really working well. I mean, I know I've told this story probably even before on this podcast, but I always remember the story of the experience that I had working with a very large group, 50 or 60 people. I was with 3 other trainers, and the CEO of this company was there, and he was already at that time probably a billionaire, and was part of creating very large tech companies, and this was his newest venture. And he had brought all, his kudos to credit to him for bringing everybody together. At that time, a fairly small team in this beautiful place. And I noticed that during the first hour that we were all together, we were going to be together for 2 days. He had, just like me right now, I'm pointing to my earphones. He had an earphone and he was holding his phone. And we were all in the circle and we were talking about the value of listening and how important it was to have open listening and to not have any distractions. And the entire time that we're talking about this and people are reflecting on how important that is, he's still on his phone. And so to this point, my assumption about this person was, this is a very powerful person. I better keep my mouth shut. He's the one paying us. He could just tell us, he could just fire us on the spot if I say anything. But eventually I actually decided, you know what, actually, this is the work we're doing. So I have to say something. And I asked him, I called him by his name and said, hey, would you mind telling us what's going on? Because there's an obstacle that's being created for me, and I suspect for the whole circle, is that when someone else is having seemingly another conversation, that can really get in the way of all of our ability to listen. And, is it possible for you to either take the call somewhere else and come back, or, turn off the phone right now, whatever options you would like to choose, and let's talk about it. So, he briefly said, it's my board. I have to talk to them. I'm so sorry. I'm going to finish this conversation, and I commit to turning off my phone for the next day and tomorrow. I will be back. And I thought to myself, we'll see. I'm not sure he's going to be back. And he did. To his credit, 30 minutes later, he was back. And after that, he was participative, and everyone in the group noticed that and came back to us during the break and said to us, that was important, because that could have been a trust eroding thing for a nascent company, and a nascent team. But now we know that our leader is fully committed to actually this one, right? Because he had multiple things he was doing. And it changed the entire event. And he was, just lovely after that, and really fully committed to the process. So, even when you're to me, the lesson is, check your assumptions, where they come from. And if you need to say something about it, say something about it, because probably on the other side of that is something positive. The outcome will be better. Because even if he'd said, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're doing, you just spoke to me like that or something, even though it was very diplomatic. But whatever the outcome was, it was important to kind of say for everybody else, this is the kind of group that we're in now. And this is what we're committing to in terms of how we're going to listen to each other. And if you're not okay with that, then you shouldn't be in this group. So thankfully, he said he was okay with it and he'd be back. But he could have also said, you know what, I really do need to deal with all these things, and I'll be out of this for the next 2 days, which would have been fine too, for the sake of the group, right?
That took courage. And I know when we facilitate, there's always this touchdown, let's give it a whirl, let's see what happens moments. And a lot of times, what our gut is telling us to do is the right thing. And I'm sure in the long run, he appreciate your honesty and the fact that you didn't couch it, what your concerns were. You spoke to him directly and respectfully, as you did. And culture also, I was thinking about when you're telling that story before, culture impacts how we receive people, like whether we realize it too. We have all these characters that helped inform who we are. And good big group nuns in school way back when. I had nuns, and we had a way of making sure we showed them that we're paying attention, that we're alerts. And it was very traditional, very strict, so there was no looking down at your paper, it was looking up. And I find that sometimes when I'm facilitating a session, I have to be cautious that those characters are not influencing how I'm receiving other people in the room.
Mm.
They crip out. Those little nuns come back and haunt me, because it's like, sit up straight, look up, like somebody could be taking notes or heads down and being, a little tired, and it's not personal. It's how
Mm.
they're receiving information, or they're not feeling well, or a lot of other things is happening. And sometimes it's been really amazing is the person who looked the most checked out comes back and gives me the most amazing feedback or insight, or raises their hand and gives comments to the group that just blows everybody away. So when we
Hmm.
have all these assumptions running through our head, that's what I loved about narrative method when you taught. It's like, what is getting in the way of your listening? So
Mm.
you got to lift those little characters up and find a place to put them.
Yes, exactly. I love that. Yeah, yeah, and maybe that's
I've seen you. I understand, but now you gotta like back off. So
right.
I think that's so important, and I would love to tell everybody that once you've conquered it once, you never have to think about it again. Mm-mm.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
again, another narrative thing I learned from all of you is a live performance. Every time we talk to somebody or with a group, it's same show, different show. Got to put everything into it all over again. So, yeah,
Hmm.
simple
Yeah.
things really can help us remind ourselves what we need
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah, I love that. And those are very practical things, right? You notice the assumption and then find out where it's coming from. A lot of times it's coming from your own experience and background, as you just mentioned, those little characters. And so there's something we can actually do about it, right? We can, once we identify that, we can set that aside and change the dynamic. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, good. So maybe that's the question I offer to everyone now is, what's getting in the way of your listening? And pay attention to that, and then see if you can set it aside and see what kind of impact that might have on your relationships at work and otherwise. But for now, I think we'll leave it at that, and really want to thank everyone for listening. And if you've been inspired by this and you want to learn more about how you can be a better listener and how that leads to being a better storyteller and more effectively communicate your messages, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We're at narrative.com, NARATIV.com, where you can find this podcast and all of our other episodes. And of course, lots of resources. We're always here to listen to you. And until next time, I wish you all well. And thanks, Julienne, for being with me once again.
You're welcome. Yes, simple things that work. That's the message of the day and every day when we're doing this.
Yeah. Thank you all. See you next time.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.